Hi, everyone. Thank you, Amir. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. So, like always, we're going to start with, oh, I don't want to do this one. Oh, okay. We're going to start with what we're drinking, but I'm not very proud of what I'm drinking. It's been a tough week. So, it's a big glass of Pepsi, not the diet version and not the first one. So, I do have the water down next to me, just, to pretend there's also a good side.
Balance, always important.
I'll go next. I knew this question was going to come, and I had my thing. This is what I'm drinking. I don't drink it straight from this, but I don't even know what it is. I just always drink it. Lemon lime electrolytes. It's so good. Uh, it's like it's the only way I actually consume water more than just when I'm taking a pill in the morning or something. So it works.
Okay, so
Yeah.
trip for anyone who goes on a fly-in reserve, or like for some reason you find yourself on a plane with weight limit. I went on one and we were allowed 15 kilograms in total, teaching materials, luggage, clothes, whatever. And we knew there's not a lot of shopping going on the reserve. So those came in very, very handy. I had 2 or 3 in my pockets, lasted me through the whole 2 months over there because it's a few drops at a time.
There
So
you
if you
go.
go camping or somewhere where you really don't need to carry stuff, rely on that.
Mhm.
Pocket full of wonderful. So I'm sort of the same way about water. I'm terrible at drinking water, so I had to find fun ways to do it. So drinking watermelon flavored water, which is almost water. Is that right? I don't know, but it's tasty. It's enticing. It's what keeps me going.
Nice.
I think this is the most diverse session of what are you drinking we've had so far. So now that you know the most intimate detail about everyone on the call, let's actually get to know Blair and Lisa.
I can go first since Blair went first with the like with the drinks. So um, just a little background on me. I'm a senior UX researcher. I work at Macadamian, which is a healthcare consultancy. So we work with a ton of different clients. I would say before that, I've worked on everything from insurance companies to oil and gas companies. And previous to my research or service design career, I was actually a designer. So I have run the gamut in terms of what you can do in design from the pixel perfect all the way to asking the questions that I asked today. So it's been a journey for sure.
Awesome. So I'm Blair Ryan. I am, I guess, one of the things people use to describe me, serial founder. I'm that guy. I I wrote notes, like I needed notes to remember who I am, but I wrote notes and I wrote 3 times founder. I think it's actually 4. I'm not sure. I've lost track. And in fact, I'm about to launch another startup very soon. But my first one, and I think perhaps most relevant to this conversation, I started a social enterprise called the Empathy Factory, and what we did for many years was teach kids, mostly in Canada, but teach kids what is empathy, why is it important, and then show them how they could use it to make the world a better place. And the world was, we always put kind of quotations around it because it was really what they saw. Some people's worlds were smaller, bigger, but how do we extend our empathy? That's really what we kind of work with them to build. And so, my career then progresses. I'm always trying to solve what I consider to be really important problems or old problems that need new solutions, that kind of thing. So the next startup was called The Rounds, a tool for doctors to allow them to collaborate the way every other professional collaborates. So put away the fax machine and the pager and use technology to collaborate, that kind of thing. So that's the type of approach I've taken throughout my career. And then it's an important problem, but also one where I feel I can see the impact of the work I'm doing. That's a really important one for me. And I know we'll have time to talk about it more as we go today. But what I'm working on right now and is probably weeks away from existing is technology that will allow companies to to measure, track, and help their employees improve their emotional intelligence. All kinds of really cool reasons why you would want to do that, or we'll talk a lot about it. My last thing, and maybe this is our segue, this is my version of peppermint and ginger tea coming together. I call it the segue tea. But one of the things that I realized as I was taking notes about who am I, one of the things I realized was like, the work I do, I'm selling, like the last work I've been doing is in workplace well-being. So I'm talking to companies and saying, like, we're going to help your employees be more productive. You'll retain your best talent and blah, 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 like all of that stuff. And it's true. That's what we sold. But I never cared about that. And I still, I won't pretend that that's what drives me. Like, I don't care about your attrition. I care about your individual employees being happy and healthy. And by providing that, we got them those outcomes and all that. But anyway, so that's a big part of where empathy comes into building products, building companies, but just like the way I kind of go about my days. Anyway, so that's me.
Part of all of these changes going on, I think it really ties into why we're talking about empathy today. Typically, it's a bit of a vague topic and everyone has their own spin on it. But what I've come to understand really, really prevalent recently is that it can actually be very, very tangible. So, why empathy and why now? So, I guess the best way to kind of talk about that, maybe I'll pass it on to you, Blair. To me, it was that resource that you shared about the great attrition and resignation. And I think that's really a big part of why it's such a timely discussion.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things, I guess, well, the Great Resignation, just to make sure everyone kind of is on the same page, but in the last year, it was like 22, 23 million Americans, call it 25 million North Americans, have just left their jobs. Left their jobs in a time when a lot of people are suffering financially and all that stuff. They're putting their own kind of their own well-being, and that using that term very, very broadly, but they're putting that above their paycheck or the benefits or that kind of thing. So what we're learning, what certainly is one of my firm beliefs, is that they're leaving because they don't get what they need from their bosses or from their companies. A lot of that being empathy. So just that feeling that they are cared for and can trust the people they work with, and work in a compassionate environment is causing people to leave. One of the things that I don't see being written about a lot, but it's my own belief, is the pandemic is the impetus, or that's not like, I think there's a relationship there. It's a really strong relationship, but it's not just like people were afraid of getting sick and decided to leave their jobs. It was there was a pandemic, everyone started working from home, and most managers, most leaders don't know how to manage a team over Zoom or what have you. Everything changes when the communication style changes, body language goes through is gone. All of the things we used to you hear laughter in the office from the other room, and oh, she's laughing at it, that fills me with joy. Also, I know she's having a good time. But the stuff that just all disappears, and suddenly really good managers became average managers at best, and people were leaving. So I think that's a big issue, a big part of the problem that caused people to leave. So I have so much more to say. I'll stop. Holy smokes! Yeah, go for it.
Well, I'll say this too, Blair. I think from working in sort of healthcare spaces, you saw this in droves, especially from physicians, right? Like there was just no way of missing that the pandemic itself, right, and attending to it was really the cause of so much physician burnout, very well documented in a lot of resources. And just we saw it, right? Like there were the thing called traveling nurses that had to like travel to cover staff shortages, right? That was incredibly difficult for people to see, but it was part of what was needed, right? And you mentioned something around like the laughter, right? Well, like there's a phenomenon now called Zoom apnea, right? Like, where did this come from? And it's that piece of not having the direct sort of in room experience with people. So I can see how that ladders up to some of the some bigger managerial organizational changes that are happening in this space.
And one of the things that I'm looking at is, well, what happens next, right? So Roxana, your question was like, why now? What happens next? So not that most people, I don't think, really got settled in working from home. I think we admitted at some point 6 months in, okay, this isn't going away just now, but it's still a lot. I'm at my kitchen table 2+ years in. I'm comfortable enough, but this is not like my permanent forever thing. Anyway, what happens in the future of work, where I think we kind of generally agree that, and if you don't generally agree when I say we do, by all means, tell me otherwise. But I think people generally agree that the future of work is hybrid, and so that means we're going to go through another change, another big transition. It's not going to be just like for half the people, it'll be going back to the office, and we know that it's normal, we're comfortable. It's going to be half of the team. It would be like us having this call, and Lisa, you and I in the same room. Roxana is, wherever she is, and Amir, you're with your terrible, you can't hear us because your audio and your Wi-Fi. Like, you're managing so many more things. So it's going to be another huge transition, and really super difficult for managers and leaders yet again. And I don't know that, uh, I don't think we have the tools in place yet, because we're just getting caught up to everyone working from home. So anyway, I think that's another big part of where empathy needs to play a role going forward.
But I'll tell this one more time back to the clinical and healthcare side. Now more than ever, healthcare has become, or will start leveraging, I think, technology to make it happen, right? Like, we are trying to see a trend towards care at home versus care in office. That was part of the way that care was maintained during the pandemic, but seeing there are benefits, there are certain populations that really could benefit from not having to leave their home because they can't, they have limitations, or really just the stability of being at home is what's beneficial for them. Well, then that implies a shift in the paradigm of care, and the tools that are used, and how diagnoses are delivered and used, and what technology is there to bridge that, right? So I think that there's a little bit of new horizons beyond just the workers themselves, right? But clinicians and patients on the other end, I think, are seeing this too.
I really want us to kind of jump into what this transition it means from, what sort of products we see in the digital space now. But before we do that, I'm going to do something weird once again, maybe take a step back. And like I said at the beginning, right, like empathy is a pretty vague word that everyone uses it and has some form of understanding, but there are actually tons of definitions for it. So I'd love if we could kind of go around the table and establish that first step of shared informational background, at least between the four of us and with the audience. Because, yeah, I think there's some definitions out there of empathy that I don't agree with, and I don't think they're the successful one or the ones leading to success. So I just want to ensure a bit of an alignment. Amir, what does it mean to you?
Since I'm the least informed one, I'll go first so that recency bias causes people to have the better definitions. So to me, it means being able to detect the emotion of the individual you're interacting and have an appropriate response to it. Maybe it's a bit, mechanical the way I put it, but at least that's how I understand it.
Maybe I'll say what I don't define it as. I don't define it as putting yourself in someone's shoes. I hear that very often or read about it in the context of UX research in particular and design, putting yourself in the user's shoes and then somehow you can create the perfect solution. I think that's a very naive understanding of it, because everyone's experiences are very, even if, let's say two of us were laid off this week, there's so many other factors that would determine how we actually feel. If it happened to the two of us, if, Amir, let's say you won the lottery. I don't know if you did, probably not. But if you if that happened to you and you also won the lottery, probably you didn't care too much. Whereas, oh, maybe I have two dependents or whatever everyone's individual circumstances are. I think it's a very naive point of view to think that you can truly put yourself in someone's shoes, even if you have, to some degree, shared experiences. So I'd say that's what it's not. And thinking it can be that can lead to creating products and solutions that don't actually meet your users' needs. And in terms of what it is, I think to me, the biggest part of it is taking the time to actively listen to your users and really understand where they're coming from, with no implication whether you can truly put yourself in their shoes or not. Like actually doing that exercise, listening, understanding, and responding to the needs identified or explicitly stated.
That's interesting. I think I align with the way that you're saying it, especially from being a researcher, right? Like, I think I like the definition. I believe it's Daniel Goleman's definition, and it breaks it out in three, right? There's the cognitive, like, I understand that I'm understanding your experience, or I'm taking your perspective. I may not live that experience, but at least I'm in the recognition of it. And then there's like the second part is the emotional piece, right? So there is sort of this, what you're telling me is sort of steering something in me, or it's changing something in me, right? And then the compassionate piece, I think it's interesting because you really can't, at least from in my opinion, from being a researcher, you really can't fix the problems of the people you're talking to individually, right? Like you can't fix, if I'm interviewing Blair for something, I need to listen, understand, and look across the other people that I speak to in order to really figure out what really should be part of what the solution looks like, not just I need to fix what Blair is talking to me about, right? Because then you're designing sort of absolutely in unique silos and all of that. So, but I do think the compassion piece for me, it doesn't necessarily apply directly to the one-on-one solution, but it applies potentially to, like, I work in healthcare because I am like, I feel a drive to do what good in a space like this, right? And I'm putting myself in the space where I'm able to speak to people, understand what they're going through, really digest it and sort of sit with it. And as a researcher, I've gone through experiences where I'm actually interviewing participants that have had incredibly similar experiences, or we're talking about very deep, sort of riveting topics around like fetal loss or the end of life, right? Which are such heavy topics, and you can't help not connect with that conversation, right? So there's a lot of implications into what we do as researchers, into sort of the emotional investment that we get into, but we have to recognize where sort of we draw the line, I guess.
I think that's first, Roxanne. I'm really I'm very interested, and probably for weeks offline we'll talk about this. But your feelings about empathy, it's really kind of sort of profound. I've been working in this field for 13 years or something like that, and that's like one of the more novel kind of takes on it, which I think is really cool. To the question of how do I define empathy? So again, starting 13 years ago, teaching 13-year-olds, that was kind of where I started, was how do I teach a 11, 12, 13-year-old what empathy is? I'm not going to get into cognitive versus emotional versus compassionate empathy. I sometimes don't even do that when I'm talking to adults, right? Because it can be too much. but I still do teach them empathy is, and whether it's the common that you talked about, Roxana, the like putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It's, to me, when I'm teaching it, it's about jumping into the process, and I think of it as a process. And what I mean is this. So one of my first experiences, like truly like changed me experiences with empathy, was I'm walking down the street. This is a real thing that happened. Walking down the street, I'm going to Subway for lunch. I see a homeless person, and I've told the story many times, and I tell it unabashedly. I saw a homeless person, and I was like, ugh. And I started to cross the street, and I was like, am I still that guy at like 25, 26-year-old? I'm crossing the street to not have to. I'm an introvert, and I didn't want to have an exchange anyway. So I was like, no, don't frig off, I continue my walk, and then he's facing me as a sign that says, "I'm cold and I'm hungry. Can you help?" Um, and I'm like, well, I don't help. Yeah, I can't help. I'm poor. I need to go get my sub. But it hit me, and this is where kind of the cognitive empathy comes in to start at that part of the process. Like, oh shit! Like literally, it's the fall. I'm not wearing a jacket. I am cold. Okay, I am going to Subway because I'm starving. I am hungry. He says, cold and hungry, can you help? I'm like, I'm cold and hungry. And it took a moment like that for me to realize, like, this is the reasoning through, the thinking through, Amir, kind of to what you talked about, is like the mechanical part, right? This is me thinking through what that person is probably feeling. And because I happen to be sharing similar circumstances, it allowed me to move into that emotional empathy where I'm actually sharing in that emotion with him, feeling it with him. And then back to cognitive, I'm thinking like, but I can go to the store right now and I can buy myself a sub. He does not have that luxury. Like, and so now I'm starting to think, okay, I need to do something. I start to feel compelled to act, and that's the compassionate empathy. I'm buying this guy a 6-inch sub. Sorry, I can't afford a 12-inch for you, friend. But here you go. Right. So that's how I define empathy. It's all of that, any of that, wherever you can see yourself. But again, when it comes to learning or teaching or practicing empathy, it's just like jump in somewhere in that process, and you're doing empathy.
I agree. I was one of the resources that we included in the recipe is one from Normal Nielsen, and the way they break it down is kind of from the lowest level, the simplest one, where you don't actually have that much impact on the other person, where it's just pity, feeling sorry for someone, sympathy, where you kind of feel for them, and then actual empathy, where they define it as I feel with you, which I'm not convinced you can truly do that, but I understand versions of it. And then compassion is where you actually take it to the next step. I'm moved by you. So I think there, I like your perspective, Blair, more towards what I'm compelled to do something. So actually, speaking of being compelled to do something, both of you have that in your titles: leading with empathy, empathetic service designer and researcher. What does that mean in your day-to-day, Lisa, when you talk to, and I know you've been on a very difficult project recently where that really came into play. What does it mean to actually apply that in your user research?
So I think our job really is to uncover things, right? So we have to find ways to craft questions and direct conversations in a way that make people feel comfortable, right? I think that's one of the places where I find it plays very important roles, especially when you touch on very delicate subjects, right? Like pregnancy loss, for example. I haven't definitely not experienced that. I've been surrounded by people that have, so I've seen that, and I understand that engaging with folks in that specific experience, there's a delicacy that you have to sort of be very attuned to, right? So I definitely can't solve the problem for them, but I have to at least be cognizant of where I know and where I can't impact, and make sure that there's comfort in that conversation, right? I think that's very important from a research process, not only in an interview, which is definitely potentially one of the most deep connections you can have with another individual trying to understand their experience. But overall, during the delivery of, findings back to clients and all of that, right? Like you have to frame it in a way that it doesn't sound like me, the cold researcher coming and saying this, I heard this, right? Like frame it around why that was important, because you shared those things that you heard, those nuances in the voice, the way that people were carrying themselves. If you have a visual of like the interview, right, and all that stuff. So I think it becomes a part of making sure that not only you, but everyone else that is learning from that experience is grounded sort of in the same place. And I think I tried to carry that across any engagement that I do, because if nothing, I think it gets lost, right? Like it just becomes a findings document that gets lost. But if it touches a little bit on that emotional piece, then there's more impetus to connect and correct, which is what the power of these companies and products have, I think. So
I'm just gonna say one small thing before, just to interrupt, kind of side comment. I think that ties into what we talked in previous episodes about personas too. There's like a big upside down bell curve. People are really pro personas in product research or anti personas, and I think part of that is whether you're able to actually induce this empathetic response in your stakeholders and clients through personas. So to me, really, if you're anti-personas, then you haven't had perfect researchers yet, but don't quote me on that one.
I'm ambivalent to personas. No, I'm just kidding. They're
Could
good
someone say what the personas are? I get you. So for me on the other side, so I'm starting companies. That's kind of what I've done, and when I think of that is, I want to bring along really great people with me on a journey, and I feel like the only way I could possibly get these great people to join me and keep them engaged and staying with the company is to put them first. So not to say we people first and all that stuff, but is to truly put them first and to care about them, and they will know, and I everyone I think who's ever reported into me, I hope this is true, would say I know he cares about me. He cared about me, cared about my growth, he cared about what was going on at home, and a lot of those things, and I feel like if you can do that, a lot of the again, the performance is good. People want to be there, they stay, etc. Performance is good, morale is good, all of that stuff kind of takes care of itself. It's really like highest level. It's just like give a damn about those people, and you're well on your way to being an empathetic leader. Then there's a lot of actually applying the empathy. It's the asking questions and not being judgmental and stopping to listen instead of trying to solve their problems, and a lot of those things that go with it. But it's just really putting the people at the center, and I think the more you practice empathy in all kind of facets of your life, the more it just naturally shows up in leadership and that sort of thing. So
Blair.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you something, because you're teaching sort of empathy to leaders. Have you yourself in your non sort of startup world, have you yourself encountered sort of empathic leaders, and how do you sort of frame that for your teachings?
Yeah, and it's funny because one of the things I say a lot is like, well, think of all the managers you've had, and were any of them empathetic? Typically, people can go right to the part like, yes, they stand out. They may never have actually thought about it. Was that person empathetic or what have you? Because of the way I think of the world and all this stuff, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the leaders and the, that I've had that weren't, because it's about like, what's the disconnect and how do I fill it and that kind of thing. With that said, I can look back to, some like substitute teacher I had, and I brought this up the other day, and I have to thank him, by the way, but a substitute teacher I had in 10th grade who helped me figure out math, the entire subject of math. He just like, he's there for 3 days, but he spent the 3 days fixing me, right? And I think of like those were the moments that I want to recreate for others. And so as a leader, and I think this is not specific to trying to be an empathetic leader, but as a leader, I'm trying to take the very best of my university football coach and my co-founder and all these things, and I try to turn it into what I think then is kind of the empathetic leader, the archetype.
in this space.
Actually, there's a question in the chat from Bracket. Empathy is a bit abstract. So how, for example, would you apply it to an ML algorithm? Sentiment analysis is a close example, but what about being able to recognize user state of emotion? So I thought that was really interesting. I found an example of one of the resources I've included is an example of an interactive system. I think the name was Zara, the Supergirl. And the idea was the system was having a conversation with the user. It had built in sentiment analysis, emotion recognition, facial and speech recognition modules to kind of exhibit responses, like human like responses, sharing emotion with the person they're interviewing. So, if I understood correctly, the point of all this was that after a 5 to 10 minute conversation with Zara, um, the user would receive a comprehensive personality analysis. And this one claim in the paper, I'm not sure if there's anything newer, but it's actually the first prototype that incorporated a full empathy module. So that one was, I think it was 2015. So there may be something newer that I didn't find. So if anyone in the audience knows of any other resources, please send them our way. But I thought that one was really cool. And to what you were saying, Amir, about just like the detection part works, but what about the response part of it? I think I know I was reading. So I think the response part of it is really important. I was reading this paper about AI and experience empathy, and I know I've been in the healthcare side for a while, and a very prevalent concept is clinical empathy. And it's shown that if the physician has clinical empathy, it actually leads to really significant positive impacts. For example, the patient is more likely to share an accurate description of their history, which we're not always willing to do, share our medical history. The other one is medication adherence. Like the numbers there are terrible, like only 50%, and they haven't changed since the 80s, really. They haven't gotten any better. So that clinicians or clinical empathy leads to improved medication adherence. And then the other finding around that was that people are more likely to cope in a more positive way with bad news and kind of take the next step. So really, there's no doubt of the importance of clinical empathy. So then, kind of going to what you were saying, Amir, what does that mean from an AI product? If you're only able to detect the patient's response, you know what it is. So, based on one of the definitions, you understand how they're feeling. So, you have cognitive empathy. But can an AI have the emotional and the compassion one? And would patients respond if those two are missing? I'm not sure if that's a rhetorical question or anyone has a clue there.
Let's ask the AI, shall we? No, but I do. It does resonate a little. It does resonate, and I think even from being a patient oneself, right? Like the one once you see sort of clinicians engage with you, you can have two different types. You have the very straight, direct, dry sort of version, and you have the one that remembers your story, remembers your history, connects with you in a different way. Um, you know, I fight to keep those, right? Like that, finding that is rare, especially I would say in the US healthcare system where time means money, right? So it actually creates a potentially different dynamic depending on the doctor themselves, right? So I think it's interesting to see what measures could be tweaked or pulled, extracted from those models, right? Because I think there's only benefits to gain.
There's one other thing. Cut me off if I'm taking too much time, but there's this general idea that, and we haven't covered it, but like human beings aren't actually very good at empathy. Like we're hardwired to do it and all that stuff. We like, however, I'm making a career of like trying to cultivate it because most people aren't very good at it. Also, there's on the other end of the spectrum the people who, the empath that we call them, the empath, and they're feeling everything and they want to fix and solve everything, and they burn out. And you'd see that in healthcare more than anywhere else, I'm sure. So like we're actually not very good at finding that right fit. So here I'll solve healthcare for you. Is let's better prepare physicians and nurses and care teams to be empathetic. Let's like in medical school, let's talk about empathy instead of just tying sutures and anatomy and all that stuff. Let's teach them that, and let's use the AI in everything but that kind of where empathy from a human being is absolutely necessary. AI is better at reading an X-ray than a human being. AI is better at remembering patients from 3 years ago, as you mentioned there, Lisa. Like, I love it when they remember me. Well, let AI remind the doctor who is empathetic because we've trained her or him to be so. Let the computer, so to speak, do that. Anyway, so I think we can, you can like augment or supplement healthcare so that actually delivering empathetic care is the main focus of the physician or the nurse practitioner, whoever that may be. So.
And it doesn't become a weight, right? And this could apply to research as well, but that's another rabbit hole for another day.
There's a journal article, in principle, obstacles for empathic AI. Why we can't replace human empathy in healthcare? And if it's not in there, it will be by tonight.
It is.
Yay! Yeah, that one is the one with it's the one that talks about the importance of clinical empathy, the one with the accurate history, medical adherence, things like that, and then kind of where AI, which component of AI, or which component of empathy AI falls short. So to me, it provides a clear picture of where the gaps remain. So maybe it can replicate cognitive empathy, but it's missing the mark on that more emotional and compassionate part.
For me, I don't see it on there, but the resources, it's a book called Empathy Rules by Sherry Turkle. So she's from I think she's been teaching at MIT for a long time, and she's kind of at the intersection of empathy and technology. And so she kind of talks about how technology has just like destroyed our ability to be empathetic and all of that. So I find it really interesting. Maybe this is just personally, but I think it's probably relevant to others too. But like I am like, and I don't know if this is as meta as I think it is, but like I want to build technology to help, artificial emotional intelligence technology to measure and track and teach people emotional intelligence that they are lacking because of technology. So anyway, it's a brain bender. But anyway, Empathy Rules is pretty good. I liked all of these resources. So if that one doesn't sound good, just pick one or two, and they're all really well thought through.
But there was one video, I believe it's Slim's talk about the inherent connection of empathy to creativity. And it's a video on YouTube. I'll include it. And I think it's less about the art version of creativity for us, although that's how he got to that core understanding of it. But I think in the way that we creatively have to figure out solutions to a lot of the world's problems in different spaces. I think that in the way that we can at least find the adequate level of empathy to connect with, I think that allows us to get better at solving those. And it all starts with listening, right? And I think that's core to Slim's video, right? He talks about listening to a friend. He talks about listening to wood, right? And how wood gives feedback. And I think that it's sort of like a little left field kind of approach to empathy, but it really is more about the skill of how do you like impart empathy into what you do, and less about specific rules, right? Like get comfortable in listening. So
I was gonna say, I know we're super short on time. This one passed super quickly. But before we went live, one thing that Lisa and I and Blair talked about, that we kind of, at the end of the day, even if we were to somehow magically, well, not magically, but eventually be able to implement all kinds of empathy in an AI, there's still another barrier, which particularly in healthcare, it's the trust element. And Lisa, you were talking about a particular example you had challenging. I will time you for it. 2 minutes.
I will be efficient with this. And it wasn't actually in healthcare, but it was actually the trust of a machine learning model, right? And the technology, right? Because we're talking about AI reading us, but then how do we depend on it, right? So there was this push to install new technology into aviation for specific monitoring activity, and the idea was that an ML model would recognize barriers or interceptors that were sort of identified along the way. And it's something that the pilots, it's a job that the pilots had been doing for a very long time without the assistance of technology. They did it with their eyes and a phone call to sort of document all of that. And they were really good at it, right? So when the idea of this technology was introduced to them, they were like, oh, that sounds great. And then when you started digging into the conversations with them, they were not certain that that was really going to bring as much benefit as the technology was expected to bring. It also shifted the way that they did their work. So we did interviews with the pilots before the discussion of the technology, and we actually had to do listening sessions with them after, right? We had to provide them the avenue for them to give us and express sort of the concerns, why they didn't trust it, what was feasible to them, what was acceptable to them for that technology in terms of an accuracy threshold to accept. And they rated it at, they needed a very high level of accuracy, not only because, well, we're changing the way that we do things, how does that reflect on us, but it also reflected on their reputation and their accuracy, even if the technology was great or it failed. So it's impressive to see that while technology could be a great enabler, there is some human element to trusting that and being able to say, okay, I can trust this with me. So listening to those pilots was a great example of having to figure out, okay, well, we can say that this is the best technology in the world, but really is it in the eyes of these men that do this job on a daily basis? So it was a great learning and humbling experience, and an opportunity to really dial into that part of the empathy wheel.
So thank you for being so succinct. With 3 minutes left, what's everyone's call to action? And you're allowed to be selfish to our audience. Blair, I know you have cool things coming up in the next few weeks. So what do you want from our people?
Yeah, I decided not to be selfish. So they planted the seed for weeks, don't be afraid to, ask for something. But I don't have anything to ask for except for if you're here, you probably care about this. Keep caring about this, because I think it's so important, and go easy on yourself if you're having trouble being super empathetic, and whether it's in leadership or in product design or whatever. And you can fake it until you get there, and that's perfectly okay. That's a topic of my next talk. You can fake empathy until you have it. You don't There's a saying, you don't need to be in a wheelchair to build a really great ramp. If, like Lisa said, you ask great questions and listen to the answers and all that stuff, Roxana, you don't need to have been, in a wheelchair to walk in my shoes or whatever that looks like. So anyway, that's mine.
I'll say this: you have to be compassionate with yourself when you're being fully empathetic. Because it's not just do it and walk away, especially if you're going to deep experiences. It's draining, actually. And because it just requires a lot of you. So be compassionate about yourselves and find ways to make it part of your daily life and your job and your outside of your work. And if we can make technology as empathetic as as we can be, then we're, I think, potentially going in the right direction, as long as it stays in the good. But hopefully that's where we're headed.
So I know we're on time, but I actually have a selfish one to ask this time. I'm doing a personal project. So if you're using a health or wellness app or any form of app towards behavior change, want to eat better, want to lose some weight, want to run, any of those, drink more water, please connect with me on LinkedIn and send my way your best and or worst experiences. No middle. There's too many experiences out there. Send me your best and worst. I am doing a bit of a collection of how digital solutions either fail or really support us. So that was my first selfish one since we started. I like it. Thank you,
Thank you so much.
everyone.